Hi everyone. Thank you very much for tuning into this week's webinar Wednesday. It's quite a special one because we have our very own Julian Boulding who will be the speaker. You might know me by now. My name is Stephanie Fox. I'm going to be moderating the webinar. Just some housekeeping before I introduce Julian. Timings, we'll have a 5-minute introduction now. Julian will give a 35-minute presentation, as long as he stays to time. We'll have 15 minutes for Q&A, and we're aiming to finish by 1:55 p.m. London time, so you can be ready for your next virtual appointment. So please do keep your microphones muted. If we're going to call on you to ask a question, we will unmute your microphone, or you can unmute your microphone. But that being said, please do keep your videos on so Julian has some friendly faces to look at while he's talking. We're going to have a Q&A portion at the end, but if you think of a question while Julian is talking, just send them to me directly in the chat. So to do this, go to your chat box where it says to, you should see a drop-down menu and you just select Stephanie Fox instead of everyone. We'll go through all of the questions and we'll select a few to ask Julian once he's finished speaking. So all questions should be sent to me in the chat box, not to everyone, because they'll get lost in the noise. If you'd like to ask Julian the question yourself, just say I'll ask or something like that. If you prefer for me to ask for you, just say so. Hopefully your speaker viewing mode is set to speaker view. If not, just click speaker view at the top right of your screen. Julian's going to be sharing slides on his screen, so if you can't see his little speaker window when his slides are on the screen, just select Show Active Speaker Video. For any technical issues, please message Paul Squirrel directly in the chat, in the same way that you find me, or you can email Paul at paul.squirrel, SQUIRRELL, at thenetworkone.com. We're recording this webinar and we will share the link of the recording with everyone afterwards. So if you prefer not to take notes, you don't need to. And if for any reason the system crashes, just please use the unique link that you logged in with today. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce our speaker, the Network One's own Julian Boulding. So Julian is president of the Network One, which he co-founded in 2003. Previously, Julian spent 14 years in a succession of senior roles at DMB&B Group, now part of Publicis. While with DMB&B, he lived and worked in the UK, Europe, Latin America, and the USA, coordinating international advertising campaigns for companies like Procter & Gamble, M&M Mars, Avon, and Philips Electronics. In 2002, Julian left DMB&B Group to found the Network One, now the world's largest of independent marketing communications agencies, counting more than 200 active members and a further 1,000 accredited agencies in 109 countries worldwide. He's a member of the Marketing Society since 2006, a director since 2011, and now an elected fellow, board member, and honorary treasurer. He's closely involved with the Marketing Society's international relations and expansion into India, Hong Kong, Singapore, UAE, USA, and other new markets. He is also a freeman of the Washport Company of Marketers in the City of London. Julia is a regular speaker at global and regional industry events, including the Cannes Festival of Creativity, Spikes Asia, AdAsia, AdFest, the ICO Global Summit, and the Holmes Global PR Summit in Washington, DC. Finally, Julian is a graduate of Cambridge University in the UK. So without further ado, I will now turn over to Julian.
So thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you. It is quite strange to have yourself introduced when you spend more time introducing other people, I think. But it's great to see so many people, and it really brings those kind of numbers to life, and all of those trips that Paul and I and the rest of the team have spent traveling the world to meet people. So it's really great to see so many people from so many different countries here on the webinar today. So usually, of course, at this time of year, we enjoy a week in the south of France at the Cannes Lions Festival. Of course, as I explained to my family, it's entirely work, but it is actually somewhere where we have made a lot of contacts and met a lot of agencies over the years who have become members, friends, collaborators, and all amazing, wonderful people. And it is a little bit of fun too. But of course, this year is very different in so many ways, and Cannes is one of those. First of all, the Cannes Lions decided to postpone its festival until October, and then as the dates started to get nearer, it realized even that, with all the logistics involved, would not be possible. So they've postponed the festival until its usual time, but next year. One of the things which I usually do, or have done for many years, is write a little review of what I learned and what I heard at the Cannes Festival. Obviously, I can't do that this year, but it seemed a shame to let the opportunity go. So what I thought it might be helpful to do, and this is the basis of this seminar, is just go back over many of the different webinars, which some of which we have done ourselves, others of which been done by the Cannes Lions themselves, by Campaign, by the Drum, by Jack Myers in the US, and by people in different parts of the world, and try and pick out some pictures about where the agency ecosystem stands today. So that is really the theme of my talk. And I'll share the screen because we do have some slides. There we go. So yes, there we are. It's the little bit that says not the Cannes Review 2020. So sadly, no south of France, no sunshine, no beautiful blue sea, but some interesting things about how other people have approached the issue and their experiences during the pandemic. One thing we did find, let's see how I go forward here. There we go. Is that one or two people made it to Cannes. Actually, as far as we know, only two. Both of whom were from the Publicis Group, and this is what they did. They actually hired the huge auditorium where they usually present the awards, and just two of them, Arthur Sadoun, the CEO, and Maurice Lévy, the previous CEO, gave a presentation to an empty hall. And it was kind of bittersweet. You kind of half admired them for the chutzpah of doing it. And you half felt, my goodness, is this an image of the agency world? Here are the big, proud companies talking to an empty space. And I must admit, I had a little bit two feelings about that. But nevertheless, you know, there were no lions at Cannes, but there have been some awards. And what we usually do with the Cannes Review is to start with, you know, who won the big prizes. And this one is the one that caught my eye. It's quite a well-known film. We're not going to look at the whole campaign, but if you haven't seen it, it's the one where they have a time-lapse photography of a Burger King Whopper going moldy and disintegrating before your eyes. And the one show, which is in New York, it's the big kind of creative show in New York, is probably the biggest show that's awarded prizes so far this year. And it was the big winner there. So what does it say about us and our industry and where we stand? For me, it says some slightly worrying things. It makes us think, is this really what advertising should be doing? Or is it something which has got stopping power but doesn't have an effect on clients' business in a positive way? And certainly they made a big thing of it. This is Arthur Sadoun. He's actually got Mark Reed, the CEO of WPP, in lockdown at home, talking to him because both of their agencies were involved in the making of that particular Burger King film. So this is like the big show of the networks. Is it right? Is it not? I don't know. Here's something I found quite interesting. WARC, which is the advertising research organization that runs the Advertising Effectiveness Awards, took this shot, which is from part of the campaign. It's a bus shelter poster of the moldy Whopper, and asked a behavioral economist, someone who's well known to us, Phil Barden, this is him speaking at our Indie Summit a few years back, to just say what he thought. And he wrote a terrible piece that said why it didn't work, and explained that, yes, if you intellectualize it, it may be helpful because it does say that the Whopper has no artificial ingredients and preservatives. But your mind doesn't work that way. It looks at an image and it goes, oh, that's disgusting. and you associate it with the brand's logo, and then you've got to hope that somebody is reading the small print to get kind of the joke. And it just seemed to me a little bit with these two things, there's a huge lack of direction in the industry. You know, are we talking to an empty room? Are we running ads for ourselves that amuse us as an industry, but don't actually support the client's brand? It made me wonder. Let's move on, because what I want to spend the rest of this presentation on is a look at what we might call the agency ecosystem today. Where do we as independents stand within the system? Who is doing well? Who is doing less well? And where do we see this taking us, and where do we see the opportunity for independence, which we'll come to the independence at the end. First thing I wanted to say is, there are kind of 5 real franchises. There's the technology platforms, the Google, the Facebook, the Amazon, the Chinese rivals, WeChat and Alibaba. There's the traditional holding companies that have dominated the agency business for a lot of my career, the WPPs, the Publicis, the Omnicoms, the IPGs. There's in-house agencies, which certainly in the States are rising fast in size and influence. There are the consulting firms like Accenture and Deloitte, who've really got the headlines in the last couple of years, mostly through buying leading independent agencies like Droga5, like Karmarama, like Coloraba, like the Monkeys, like Shackleton. And last but not least, there's the independents. So how does this fit together, and how does the industry as a whole doing? Let's look at the parts and see how they stack up. Okay, the tech platforms first. James Murphy, who ran probably one of the best ever independent agencies in the UK, Adam and Eve, sold it for a huge amount of money to DDB, where they continued successfully until he left again to start his new agency, which is about 3 weeks old. But in the interim, he was on gardening leave as chairman of the UK Advertising Association. And he made this point. He goes, even the biggest agencies we have are SMEs in the real world. So whatever we think we might do to shape our destiny, however, sometimes we might think, gosh, how do we compete with, an Ogilvy, a BBDO, or one of the big holding agencies? Let's all remember, we're actually all small. And so this is a graph I've shown on several occasions, because until you kind of look at this, you don't really realize, we think Publicis and WPP and Omnicom are big, but this is their market value, market capitalization. So that's what it would cost to buy all their shares on the stock market today, in theory. And we just see how tiny they have become. Even Accenture is more than 10 times the biggest of the holding companies. Facebook is, 671 billion, is what, 70 times the size of WPP. And Google is 100 times the size of WPP. And Amazon is now, 150 times the size of WPP. I do hope I've got the maths right. But the point is the scale. We are small fish in this big pool, and all of us need to be agile and smart and clever to survive. Don't ever believe that those holding companies have the scale to fight the big players. And the big players are doing incredibly well. Paul makes this chart for me quite regularly and updates it, and the picture is always the same. This is the last 3 years before the pandemic, and what it shows is the change in value. So it starts on the left-hand side of the graph, at a 0 point, and it shows the rise or fall in the value of the companies. And what we see is obviously the Dow Jones, the biggest stock market indicator, has risen significantly. It was about 20% up, 25% up during that period. But Facebook, Google, Amazon, all well ahead. So what happened to those stocks in the pandemic? Because a fashionable stock usually falls in a crisis. So yes, they fell. Everybody fell. But what happened was they didn't fall that far. They did fall. Amazon less, because obviously the business model is more e-commerce driven, and e-commerce had a boost during the pandemic. But Facebook and Google, went below that line. They were about 30% off their base. there in the early part of March, which was really the height of the market crash. But look how quickly they have recovered. So if we look at where they were a couple of days ago, they are now 10–15% above where they were at the beginning of the pandemic. They're above that. They're not just caught it up like Procter & Gamble or Unilever or some of the big companies. They've overtaken it. And Amazon is shooting ahead. It's worth more than 50% more than it was worth on the 1st of January this year. So the tech stocks are huge and growing very fast. If I turn to look at the holding companies, which, if you like, are probably our more direct competition, we see something quite different. We see and we read there's a shift away from the agency holding companies from a client perspective. The lack of transparency, much highlighted in media buying, but in other areas as well, has eroded trust with the clients. It's more than just a media buying problem. There's a belief that the holding company model is self-serving. It is growing shareholder value as opposed to stakeholder value. And that is like a big shift that we see in the industry. As we care more about social responsibility, we see that move towards shareholder value and short-term growth are not enough. We see their declining profitability. We see them losing senior people to save costs. We start to realize that the buy now, pay later model, as in other words, you grow through acquisition rather than organic growth, is unsustainable in low growth economies, and the markets have lost confidence. And just look at the numbers. This is the 3-year chart, and you can see where the tech companies are up, how far the WPP and Publicis fell by the end of last year. So they're both about 40% where they were 3 years ago. Lost 40% of their value. Now let's look at what happened to them in the pandemic. And that's where we see it on the big chart, but I'm actually going to show 2 smaller charts which are indicative of what's really happened. The first one is, this is Facebook. So look at what happened with Facebook. So Facebook started the year at about $580–590 billion value. It fell quite significantly in the crash. So it has lost something maybe 30% in the crash, but it's already, see the curve when it goes back up. Even Facebook, which has got problems at the moment with PR and hate speech and backlashes and boycotts, it's still 15% above where it was at the beginning of the pandemic. Look at WPP, which is fairly representative. Publicis wouldn't be much different, and Omnicom not a lot different either. It's lost half its value, and it's still only worth half what it was. It's worth just over 9 billion, and it was worth 18 back in January. So after losing 30% gradually over the years, it's now lost half its value, and it's not going up anytime soon. And its pattern is very clear on this. As Arthur Sadoun said in the note published yesterday, leaked by Publicis of his internal staff memo, we have very tough days ahead. That's Arthur in lockdown. This is Mark Reed in lockdown at home. And he said something quite amazing when interviewed by The Drum. He said, we need to think more like a company and less like a group. As René Fischer put it, if some of you saw this seminar which he gave, the way traditional agencies work simply makes no sense to startups. He was talking about startups. The model is wrong. Everybody knows it. The market has lost confidence. It will cause us problems potentially, but it also brings us opportunities. Let's look at a little more briefly at the other 2 big franchises, the in-house agencies, and then the consulting firms. So in-house agencies, they are hugely gaining momentum. It began in the US as the ANA, the clients organization, took on the agencies, 3–4 years ago, mostly over transparency. And they have systematically attacked the big agency groups, helping them to lose trust from clients. They lack the first person data, which clients are increasingly using to drive their business. And there's a big shift on the client side towards towards direct-to-consumer marketing. You know, not just the e-commerce companies, but even people like PepsiCo are making big investments in this. The IP protection issues, cost efficiency, long-term planning, these are all things which they are finding it easier to do if you move your business in-house. It's a danger for us, but it's also an opportunity, as we'll see. Just some numbers to demonstrate this. You know, 72% of US corporations now have an in-house agency, and that's up 12%. That's from Forrester Research Company just before the pandemic. David Indo runs a media consultancy for media buying agencies, and he says the decision on in-housing for a client is based on the value of the task. So a high-value task is more likely to be taken in-house, and the complexity of the task, a more awkward and difficult task, may be more likely to be outsourced. So which would you rather have? What the client really thinks is important, or what the client thinks is a pain in the ass? Doesn't augur well. We saw this scene at our last Indie Forum in Cannes last year. Obviously, this is where we'd like to be this year, but we ain't. And the two people in the middle of the speaker panel, both good friends of ours. You know, Dick Van Motman, who at the time was the creative managing director of Dentsu Worldwide, next to Marla Kaplowitz, the head of the 4As with the loudspeaker. And Dick's kind of definition was an agency. An agency is an extension of the client's marketing team. And Marla's was, no, an agency's value is in being an external voice. It's a really interesting debate. I think most of us as independents would probably vote for the second, and we're with Marla. But that's traditionally how agencies operate, and that is how the agencies, the big groups, achieve scale through doing a lot of the kind of tasks that could be in-house and creating a lack of a division between agency and client. Whereas there is a real value, as you know, we've all seen, in being an external voice. There is, of course, you know, the last problem. This is a lovely quote I couldn't help putting in from Katie Dulake in our seminar recently with the clients. And, you know, she said at the end of the day, you know, Stephen, she was talking to Stephen Mayer, it's, you know, we can all argue about in-house and external, but for me, it's very hard to get cutting edge creative talent to come and live in rural Gloucestershire, in the small village in the west of England where Mitsubishi has its headquarters. So let's move on. Let's look at consulting firms for a minute. What I found most interesting when I started to look at this is not the stuff we all know, which is, you know, the marquee signings, you know, the Galacticos and the David Droga and the Karmarama. It's the way that Accenture, who you would think of as being a quite dry and objective company, is investing in creating emotional bonds with their clients. And if we look at how they're promoting themselves, it's quite extraordinary how they are looking to create softer feel and empathy in the way that they project themselves. So I'm just going to show you a little film they're making about themselves. Hopefully. Yes.
We have big and beautiful technology at our fingertips. We can use it for good, for evil, or the trivial. But is it enough to make toasters that tweet, washers that text? We're making it our mission to create experiences that improve lives, to make shopping for what's healthy as easy as a swipe, to add empathy to the immigration process, or finding the perfect look without the wardrobe changes. These we've made real, but we're passionate about doing more. Something bigger than a commercial or tweet, because brands are built on experiences. This is a challenge for us all to invent new ways to collaborate with our clients, our partners, and each other, to disrupt and change the way we experience everything, to harness the power of technology and humanity to create something daring, something disruptive, something big, and to make something meaningful for all of us.
And there's another video. I'm just going to show you a couple of minutes at the beginning because, or less than that because of time. This is Julie Sweet, who's the CEO of Accenture in North America. And this is a film that she had made about herself. And it's just interesting, the tonality about how she talks. Let me just play that.
If your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. Hello, my name is Julie Sweet. I'm CEO of Accenture North America. And one of the things I tell my people is be fearless, but prepared. And I had something called the why rule when I was a young lawyer. I would sit on a call, and if I didn't understand why a client or a partner said something, I would write it in a book, and then I would go ask why. And it's how I learned to be a great lawyer, to be a business person. I did it for each of my career transitions. To be successful, whatever your specialization, you have to constantly be refreshing your knowledge. I try to teach my daughters that, first of all, they need to believe in themselves, and it's okay to have dreams and aspirations that feel kind of hard, because that's how you succeed and you reach for things. But
I'm going to just pause it there. But the point we're looking at is, do we know anything about the families, the personalities of the men who run Omnicom and WPP and the other holding companies? No, this is going for empathy. It's telling her about herself. She goes on to talk about when she had cancer, about her vulnerabilities, about her family. And that's creating an image for Accenture, which the holding companies simply don't have. And it's one of the major reasons why they're out of touch. The interesting thing about Accenture is this. If any of you saw, there's actually a picture of Jack at the Indie Summit in Beijing last year. And he does an unbelievably interesting analysis of the consulting firms against the holding companies. It's often available online, and it's well worth signing up for. It's usually free of charge. If not, we'll find a way to make that happen. But when he looks at it, he partly looks at how Accenture's business model, which is twice as profitable as an agency, and all of the consulting firms, they look for about 40 to 45% margin on their business, whereas an agency is really aiming at 15 to 20% most of the time. What do? Of course, they have more focus, they have more efficiency, they bring teams into longer term projects, they put them in the client's office for 12 or 14 weeks at a time, where they can build relationships, work together, get to know the clients. There's none of this, go away and come back 3 weeks later. There's none of this, oh, today I'm on this flight, tomorrow I'm on this client, next week I'm doing something else. It's all about focus and efficiency, but what also happens is it builds trust and empathy. So their business model, their operational model, helps them to build trust and empathy with clients. They are probably losing a little momentum in the pandemic right now because they can't get to the clients. So they're having to do video conferences like the rest of us. But it is a real lesson for us, how you structure the way that you work with a client to be able to build empathy and trust. Very instructive. But let's look, last but not least, let's turn to us. Let's turn to the independents. What do we see if we look at the independent agencies today? Some of the things you'd probably expect. We see them as future-facing, and a data-driven company is inherently less future-facing because data is about the past. And this is David Droger, who did sell his agency to Accenture, but he was talking last year about why Accenture paid such a sum of money for it. And he said, people hire me for my opinions. I mean, sounds arrogant. He just sold it for $250 million or what, I don't know what he sold it for. And he said, but actually, what does it mean? It means they're not hiring him for looking at the past. They're looking at hiring him for a judgment he's making on the future. And that is really critical for independent agencies. And we, as people who are not subject to the vagaries of the stock market, whose CEOs are not going to be fired if we miss our quarterly numbers 2 quarters in a row, have an opportunity here. The other thing I've noticed is, a lot of independents, not a lot, but a good number of independents are starting to develop interests they have into additional business centers of expertise. So if some of you have seen a good few of our webinars, you'll have seen Ran and Ella at Percepto in Tel Aviv, who've had a good corporate PR business for many years. and have now developed a specialty in personal branding to bring out their corporate branding expertise. Russell Goldsmith, who's a sound producer for many, many years, has a business running, creating podcasts, and explains brilliantly, how a podcast is a great new business tool. Happy to touch on that later if any of you haven't seen this. And then Nick and Joanna from 3Pipe, another classic PR agency, but are now running a division of that helps people who don't know how to leverage their presence on Amazon, increasingly vital medium, to do so. We saw this as well, and I won't play her video as well because we'll run short of time, but this is Rama Mosley, who came and talked to us right in the early days of the pandemic. She runs a film production company working with young talent, with Gen Z talent. So kids who are, anything from 15, legal and proper, don't get me wrong, upwards, up to about early 20s. And a lot of them shoot themselves. You've seen it, the Instagrams of the videos and all of this. And she just came and said, look, could I give a talk to people? Because I think it would be really helpful about how to shoot without a crew or a lighting cameraman or a sound person. And she developed, within weeks, a real expertise of that. Letterbox shooting, they could put the cable through the letterbox and the guy stands outside giving the directions on the monitor. It's a new time, it's a new skill. This is the one we began our kind of pandemic newsletters with. It was a guy who was outside my house, and he came to the door and he said, these vegetables, we had sold these to local restaurants which now cannot open, and they'll be thrown away. So we've taken them around to sell them to people so that we wouldn't be wasting food in a tough time for everybody. And I thought, yeah, that is interesting, and that is like local. That it made me think about the importance and the rising importance of local against global, because that in a way is our biggest opportunity as independents. There's many aspects of this. If we think about it, we could easily name 7 or 8, and these are ones that I wrote down in 30 seconds. Less air miles, less food miles. Why do we have to eat food brought across from halfway across the world for our own vanity so we can eat stuff that is out of season anyway? Secure supply chains. I mean, everything is made in China, but the problem with the car factories was they suddenly realized they couldn't get the components because China closed the borders, had to run very fast. If they had something a little more local, they would have been there. Return of a national consciousness. There's bad sides of this, to our opinion, as major countries, to name no names, start to look inwards and protect and promote their own interests as opposed to belonging to global organizations and global initiatives. There's a cultural understanding. I mean, today we want to talk to people. We don't want to be lectured like some enormous group. Customer experience, personalization, interactivity works better at a local level than someone who doesn't speak your language and is 10,000 miles away, and a rapid test and learn. I do believe there is a real shift of balance from global to local, and it's a huge opportunity for us as independent agencies. These are just a few examples, and I've deliberately taken them from screen grabs. This was Tarek Fontanelle. He came to talk to us mainly about Black Lives Matter, but he also talked about how they understand people on the street, especially Gen Z, because they go out and talk to them, whereas agencies traditionally sit in their office and read reports. He creates exchanges, not transactions. He exchanges something which is useful for them and a dialogue, rather than try and see them as a number on an e-commerce spreadsheet. This was an early one from Elise Mitchell, who's run several PR agencies. And she talked about what did she do in the pandemic. She wrote handwritten letters to all of her clients, as opposed to the old adage of mass personalization, which is a quite different thing from a personal touch. This is Mary Portas, who's a very famous retail shopping guru in the UK. She's identified this thing, which a lot of people are talking about now, called the kindness economy, just actually being nice to real people. And she talks about shops and malls that got the physics right, the numbers and the structures and the logistics, and the chemistry wrong. And so many retail stores are in crisis now because they don't add the value that would stop people from going to e-commerce. Spencer Gallagher talked about where new business really comes from. And this is one of the phrases stuck in my mind. He says, the bigger agencies get, the worse they get at asking existing clients for recommendations. Why? Because people don't have the relationship with their clients who they see week in, week out, that would give them the trust to ask for recommendation. Agencies don't do it. Why not? Because they've got somehow another distanced and alienated from clients. These two people I loved, you know, this is a rare shot of Swedes smiling, but they gave the first seminar. They were the people who work for Doconomy, which is the credit card that stops you spending when you reach your monthly carbon footprint limit. So it's an ecological initiative. But it wasn't that caught me. It's Johan came up with this brilliant definition, which is creativity is about thinking up new things. Innovation is about doing new things. And I think this is a real issue today when clients are distanced and lacking trust with agencies who don't see them and spend time with them enough. They're not involved in following stuff through. You know, and Cannes is a festival of creativity, but perhaps not a festival of innovation. And yeah, Johan goes on to say, you know, lots of people talk about innovation, but very few want to do the work. And it's a big thing for an agency to want to do, to not just have a great idea, but to work with the client to make it happen. The independent agencies, yeah, this was a speech by Luca Delano, who's at the Nudge Stock Festival, which is a brilliant online conference about behavioral economics. And you know, he says, the emotional associations with the action involved have more impact than emotional associations with the outcome. So what does that mean? It means to take an English example, when the government told us that we had to sing the national anthem twice while washing our hands, it told us how long we should spend washing our hands for that to be effective against the virus. But it was something that involved us. And when a government puts up statistics about how many cases or how many deaths, it doesn't really impact us. So it's the involvement, it's the personal involvement in things. And he will go on to show how different areas of the brain process these different things. But it is about people working with people, and it's the emotional insight and emotional involvement in the process. As Peter Comber, a longtime friend of ours, just written a book called Collaborative Creativity. He says it's the IKEA effect. People attribute greater value to things they had a hand in creating themselves. And this is kind of the last quote of this, which is from Dan Ariely, who's probably the most famous conference speaker that I've heard over the last weeks. He's actually doing free stuff from his mother's kitchen because he's gone back to Tel Aviv, his hometown, to help the Israeli government deal with the social issues around the pandemic and how you influence people into responsible behavior. And he says resilience can only be built through collaboration, no exceptions. And so I think that's quite a nice note to end on as we think where we're going. You know, it is a new model for clients, the independent agencies. It does work with in-house resources. It connects the two. The former problems of this connectivity are solved in the era of mass tech communications. And, you know, as Dan says, you know, resilience is about collaboration with each other, with ourselves, with people in other countries, and with clients. That's my take on the ecosystem today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julian. That was brilliant. We've had a couple of questions in. So someone has said, do you think that the holding companies will have to be broken up to be more profitable in the future?
I think it's almost too late for that. This is being talked about. Martin Sorrell gave a talk recently, and you know, we know what Sir Martin is about. He's disillusioned and sour, as Arthur Sardine called him, and he wants to see them fail. But people have tried to do that. MDC, which bought up many of the best agencies in the US, you know, Crispin Porter, Kirschenbaum Bond, and people like this, have tried to sell off the parts, but they can't. Nobody wants to buy those parts. And if a business is going down, I think it's more like Kodak. The business model is actually shot. And I genuinely don't see there's a long-term future for the holding companies 10, 15 years out from here.
Interesting. Someone else has said, when agencies in-house staff, is there a danger they can go native and put the client's interests before the agencies?
Absolutely, that's a good one. I remember suggesting that to my old bosses when I worked for a big agency, and they said, "Yeah, we've caught on that one." The thing that Accenture do, which is clever, is they don't put them in long enough. Yep, so they'll put them in typically on a 12 to 14-week assignment, which is enough to bond with people, but it's not enough to start thinking that you really are employed by Accenture and not by the client and not by Accenture. So it can happen, yes, but keep them in for not too long, because otherwise they will. You inevitably bond with the people that you work with and see every day. So it's the timing that is the issue there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So someone else has said, the industry has changed a lot during lockdown and pitching is arguably even harder. What advice would you give to independent agencies to set themselves apart?
I think, well, remember the bonds and the commitments that you already have. So an independent agency usually offers more consistency than a large corporate company does. So what does that mean? It means that most of you work, you either are leaders or owners of your businesses, or you work closely with people who are. And that consistency allows an agency to build bonds with clients. And a client isn't just a client today, but as we saw in Spencer's seminar, it's the old business is the new business. So I think we often have better and deeper relationships of trust with clients that will give us the license to call and offer our services to help without being suspected of being self-interested chances. So use that, I would say. Look at your old clients, do nice things to them, be like Elise and send them handwritten notes. There's nothing better than somebody who thinks they might have forgotten you because you haven't seen them recently. So I think there is an advantage. It's the personal relationships, but they need to be used, and clients will welcome that. In practical terms, I mean, the great thing now, often, especially in the US and I don't know where else, but certainly in the US and to some extent in other places as well, pitching is so expensive. There is an expectation you're going to a lot of work for free, a lot of research for free, shoot demo films, do research, vox pops all around the world. And it's got impossibly expensive for many independent agencies to compete for business. The great thing today is you can't. It's all on Zoom. You can't fly people all over the place. You can't shoot kind of fancy films to the same extent. So it has to some degree leveled the playing field and help to get people in front of each other. And that impressive office, that you might think, God, wow, I'd be really, something working with an agency in Madison Avenue with the fantastic Mad Men kind of backdrops. Well, frankly, look at mine and look at Steph's, and these aren't normal houses or flats or apartments. It is a leveler in some ways, and I think let's try and use that advantage.
Agreed. Thanks. So someone else has said, do you see the possibility of a hybrid of independent agencies and consulting firms as the future of independence?
I don't see it as a future, but I do see it as an opportunity. You see, one of the things about the consulting firms is, and I think we're probably primarily talking about Accenture and then to a lesser extent, Deloitte, and then somewhere further down, EY and PwC maybe. What they've done is they've tended to go for the superstar creatives. So they've bought people in the major centers where they're going to make the most money and where most of the clients will come from. So that's where the acquisitions have taken place. They haven't gone and bought a smart little agency in Slovenia. They've bought in London and Paris and Munich and Sydney and New York. So if you are in one of those places, it's tough. If you're not in one of those places, it is an opportunity because they will still need local insight and local empathy. And I would definitely think it's worthwhile to make these connections because they will have offices in most of the countries of everybody on this call, but they won't necessarily have creative people. They won't necessarily have people with insight and psychological and behavioral expertise. They'll have more technology people and, you know, making systems work. So I think there is quite an opportunity to do that. And indeed, you know, we're in close touch with some of the agencies who've been sold to the big companies, notably Karmarama and Kolareva, who are members of Network One for many years. And yeah, they said, we don't want to lose touch with you because we know we're going to need help of people with creative and insight skills in different countries.
Great, thank you. I agree. I think that, you know, the marriage of the two, the technology and the creative side and the empathy, it's a really good idea. So someone else has said, if you were to start an agency today, what kind of agency would you start?
Well, what I would not do, I would not start S4 Capital or indeed, you know, B5 Capital or anything of this nature, because it just doesn't seem to me productive to go around building an agency by buying people. You know, there are times when you need to buy a capability, and yeah, for sure, you know, acqui-hires as sometimes it's called. You know, if you buy a little company of 4 people because 3 of them have got the skills that you need, sure, that makes sense. But to build a holding company, that is what I would not do. So what kind of agency would we start? Right now, I'd probably start something in, well, I don't know. If you asked me 6 months ago, I would have said the field of experience and experiential and brand experience, you know, the out of the box, the whole kind of gestalt of the different aspects of communication, from product to packaging. With services, it's more like service design. You know, what is the design of the service from the moment I need or the moment I think I may have a need to the delivery of that need? These are kind of critical things, and they are not ads. You know, there's a funny phrase at the moment going around, acts, not ads. And it's applied to what we should be doing in a pandemic, but it's not related to the pandemic alone. It's related to what clients actually need. Think of what Johan and Matthias said about building something that stays with a client in that way. I think that's what the more advanced countries, especially the Nordics, are really focusing on, pivoting their agencies to change to that experience. Now, some of that experience has to be online, but you know, an online or phone experience, or what happens when the delivery people come. I mean, have you noticed how the delivery people are friendly now? They used to just shout the stuff at you, you know, and now they come and smile at you. You know, they stand, you know, 3 meters away, but they smile at you. They're pleased to see you, and it was nice to them because they're nice to you, and it's natural. So yeah, think about the customer experience, because the customer's need for experience is changing too, and there's an expectation that people should be nice to you, whereas there wasn't. 2 years ago, I went to a lecture, I don't know, one of the tech conferences, and the guy who had started Deliveroo, you know, just big food delivery firm in this part of the world and many other parts too. Yeah, he said he naturally, as the owner of the firm, he said, I must live the experience. So I'm going to do deliveries myself. So he spent a week delivering food. Absolutely, totally the right thing for him to do. And he started to try and engage the people in conversation when he delivered the food. And he said they were all thoroughly unreceptive, because all they wanted was to grab the thing, pay the money, and yeah, take it and go away and start eating. And he might have been a little naive, but it was quite an eye-opener for him. But I think that's that feeling of, you know, engagement and not just transactions is a social change and an opportunity. So how would we start to leverage that, and how would we start to contribute into it, as well as you know, as step back from it, yeah, and stop this kind of thing of living in an ivory tower. You know, you fly into a new city, you get in a taxi, you go to the client's office, you spend the whole day there. They probably bring in lunch, and then you get in the taxi and you get back to the airport. I mean, what do you know about that country? How are you going to advise the client in that country on what to do when you haven't seen anything except the inside of a fancy taxi? I mean, no, get on the subway. Get engaged, you know, be like Tarek Fontenelle and hang around in, you know, Brixton and Blackstock Road and all the dodgy parts of London where Lizzie tells us they have illegal street parties. Yeah, I mean, just get engaged, But this is what local is about. This is what being independent and in a community is about. It's what being you know, I don't mean small, we have to be small because you can't want to be small, but don't lose the people side, the personal side of knowing people, and then you'll be nice to them. You know, remember the old centurion principle. Why did the Roman army have such success? Because they split the army into groups of 100, because if people were groups of 100, they would fight and die for one another. When it was more than that, you didn't really know the people who were in the unit to your left, so you would not die for them. And some agencies have run that principle. You know, Taxi in Canada was famous for not having more than 100 people, and if they had 100 people, then they started another agency for 101 to work with. Megara Jesse, we work with in Austin, Texas, has done the same thing. Keep small, keep ways to be small. If you are big, find ways to divide yourself into smaller units.
Yeah, definitely. I think that human connection right now is more important than ever. So really good advice. We've got time for about 2 more questions. So I know that Mike Gibson wanted to ask a question. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Julian, thank you very much for that. Your reports from Cannes over the years have always been the best. And again, your not Cannes report this year has also been very insightful. I take your point about globalization and the excess of crazy food miles, but globalization has also helped bring many people out of poverty. It's opened us up to other cultures, international cooperation and sharing. How do we find the balance?
Well, I think the balance is in the word that you used. It's cooperation. If you are, there's so much talk at the moment about the damage caused by acquisitive colonialism. You know, slavery, if you like, is part of that, and people are pulling down statues, and in many cases, rightly so. This doesn't mean, I don't think, people should feel they have to apologize for something that was done by their ancestors 200 years ago, of which they clearly have no influence. But it is a way of looking at things, like ownership and control, as opposed to cooperation and collaboration. Mm-hmm. And, you see it very overtly in a lot of traditional colonialism, and you see it in a different and more subtle way, in the way that some powerful countries, not to name anyone in particular, but are investing in providing loans for less wealthy countries to develop facilities, ports, infrastructure, roads, which they need. And there's a fine line between doing something which is there to genuinely help the people in the less wealthy country, but without simply mortgaging them to the extent that 10 years later they have to give you the stuff that you can't pay for, and you now own chunks of their infrastructure and for you to use in ways that benefit you and not the others. So I think, I wouldn't be doing this job. I built my job on globalization, and it horrifies me to see some of the political leaders, including our own country in the UK. I try not to comment on other people's politics, but I think you're entitled to talk about your own, and Brexit and all of this, and to isolate yourself is a real backward step. And I think what we can do as communicators, we actually have a really critical role, which is to communicate the benefits of collaboration and working together for a mutual benefit. And if we can do that, then we have globalization with a much more human face. And let's not lose sight of its benefits just because it can be abused.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up now. That was really, really excellent, Julian. And a lot of people in the chat have said that it was, really thought-provoking, and they've enjoyed the session. We don't have time for any more questions right now. I'm going to share Julian's contact details if you would like to speak with him directly, or if you'd like to send him your question. Feel free to talk to him. He'd be really happy to chat to you. I know he would. Oh gosh, sorry. Here you are. So I'd like to just say really big thanks to everyone for coming. That we hope you enjoyed it, and from your comments I know that many of you did, so that's great. As per usual, we'll be hosting the webinars at the same time every Wednesday. So the next one will be held on the 15th of July on the topic of thriving after the crisis, which I'm sure is a topic on many of your minds. We'll be joined by Esther Carter. She is a partner at Moore Kingston Smith in London. Moore Kingston Smith London is the best known financial accounting firm in the market and communications agency sector. Esther will be providing a financial perspective on the COVID-19 crisis for agency leaders. By now, agencies have adjusted to the shock of the unexpected pandemic for the most part. However, now is the time to plan for the longer term. Not just the new normal of video conferencing and increased remote working, but also the financial fundamentals of your agency. Esther's presentation will focus on resetting your agency for growth, with a particular focus on a more strategically sound approach to business development. She will draw on qualitative research into what the critical success factors for a thriving business are, and share some results of a very recent survey on the financial impact of the pandemic on agencies. Now, future webinar Wednesdays can be found on our website under events at www.thenetworkone.com/webinars, and you can hopefully see it on screen. Thank you again for joining us. Really glad that you enjoyed it. Hope you all did. We hope to see you at another webinar Wednesday very soon, and have a great day, everyone. Bye for now.